It is Women's History Month. How amazing to be celebrating this month with all of you. You all look good. Look at your neighbor and say, you look good, girl. Okay, you can tell her nicer than that. So I want to start off by saying thank you. I love to start off with gratitude. I want to thank the Cleveland Public Library for opening their doors for this important discussion today. Dr. Sadie Winlock, thank you for your introduction. Twyla, thank you for all that you do. And again, to the rest of the staff here at the Cleveland Public Library. So it was in the early 1970s when an Englishman named Ian Hunter would start to travel to the States. Now, I know you all are thinking like, girl, what are you talking about? So Ian Hunter and his bandmates started traveling to the United States, and they started to perform their unique kind of music on the East and the West Coast. So they were traveling and performing on the East and the West Coast, trying to book shows for their unique music. So I mentioned this was in the early 1970s. So they were no Beatles. They were performing rock music. So one day, Ian Hunter and his bandmates decided to perform here in Cleveland. They had booked a show in Cleveland, and to their surprise, the show sold out here in Cleveland. So it was that day that Ian Hunter and the rest of his bandmates fell in love with our city. He fell in love with our city so much so that he decided to write a love letter to Cleveland. That love letter became a song, and that song became one of the greatest anthems in Cleveland's history. Anybody know what that song is? Oh, okay, you did your research. So Cleveland Rocks became our anthem. Cleveland Rocks. So the song is still played today when you go to any major sporting outing, or, you know, if it's a Friday night at a dive bar, you'll see people singing to the top of their lungs, playing their fake guitar, performing their heart out to Cleveland Rocks. So the song went on to have a lot of notoriety. Ian actually ended up getting the key to Cleveland. And so the song went on to be the theme song for Drew Carey's 90s sitcom. So Cleveland had a lot of firsts. In 1967, Cleveland was the first major U.S. city to elect an African-American mayor in Carl B. Stokes. In 1995, it was decided that the historic Rock Hall of Fame would be open here in Cleveland, Ohio, because of our early love for rock music. In 2014, Cleveland built America's largest outdoor chandelier with 4,200 crystals. The chandelier sits right outside of Playhouse Theater, which is the second largest theater district in the country, second to New York. It's New York. So Cleveland has had a lot of firsts, right? So I can go on and on about our firsts and about our notable moments, our firsts and our notable moments. But what happens when Cleveland is dead last? In 2020, City Lab released an article noting Cleveland as the worst city for Black women to live and work. Come on, somebody. So could it be true? Could it be true that our beloved Cleveland could be the worst city for Black women to live and work? Some of you are sitting and saying, of course, I know my experience, you know? So for those of us who work with Black women, you see us every day in the office, but do you see us? You hear us shouting at the front lines, but do you hear us? This conversation today is overdue. Somebody say it's overdue, y'all. Overdue. Come on, talk back to me today. So I want to set our intention for today. You all came to hear an amazing show, and I want to set our intention by saying today is all about creating an opening for a shift. The intention tonight is to create an opening for a shift wherever you sit. No matter how you walk through those doors today, we hope that you have an opening. Whether you walk through those doors today and you are curious, you want to know, what is this all about? Okay, just tell me, what do I need to do? How can I help Black women? Whether you walk through that door and you've been walking through doors like that for 30 plus years and you are tired, this is for you. If you walk through that door and right now you are traumatized, living in hell in your workplace, this is for you. I want to start off with a quote before I introduce our amazing speaker today. And the quote is by my girl Oprah Winfrey. And it says, everything that is happening to you is being drawn into your life as a means to help you evolve into who you are really meant to be here on earth. It's not the thing that matters. It is what that thing opens up in you that matters. So I want you to be gentle to yourself. I want you to be gentle to each other. And we're going to get started, and we're going to start off with a New York Times best-selling author. We're going to have a fireside chat here. You'll hear all about why she wanted to write this book, Right Within, about how she had her dream corporate job and why she had to walk away from it. You're going to hear from two dynamic, amazing women who created Project Noir over margaritas and tacos, because that's how we do it. And so with that said, I'm going to introduce our first guest today. Minda Harts is a workplace and equity consultant. She is also the best-selling and award-winning author of the MEMO and Right Within. Her third book, You Are More Than Magic for Young Adults, will be released in the spring of 2020. Minda is a professor at NYU Wagner. She is a frequent guest on MSNBC and featured on ABC News, Forbes, Fast Company, and Time Magazine. Minda is a highly sought-after speaker for companies such as Liberty Mutual, American Family Insurance, Nike, Google, and Salesforce. In 2020, she was named the top voice for equity in workplace by LinkedIn. Minda hosts a live weekly podcast called Secure the Seat. Cleveland, I'm gonna need y'all to act like we got a guest in the house and give me the biggest introduction to Miss Minda Harts. So I just want to jump right on in here. And as a reminder for our guests here tonight, if you have questions, please be sure to note your questions on the note card. Now, don't be writing a long paragraph because it's going to be a quick read. And so we will, after we have our dialogue, we'll get into some of the questions that you all have tonight. So, Minda, you released your first book, The MEMO, in 2019. And what you said, I found this really interesting. You said that the book almost didn't come out. So you said you were told that you wouldn't be able to sell any books because you weren't famous, and that you didn't have a ton of followers. So you also talked about how ironic that was, because you said, I wrote the book in which women of color would feel seen in the workplace, and we kept hearing that there was no audience for the book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What's the memo about, and what was that? Can you hear us? All right. So while we're having technical difficulties, I'm just going to check in with everybody in the room. So again, we see who, this is your first time coming to the library. How many people are familiar with Minda Harts? By a show of hands. Oh, wow. Okay. So did you all read the first and second book, or first book? Okay. So Right Within is her newest book. You all have a copy of that you'll go home with today that we're super excited about. You should also have in your bag. So now is a good time to check out your gifts. So also in your bag is a copy of Project Noir. So you get a car. Look under your seat. You might have some keys to a Tesla. Okay. Exactly. So Minda, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, are we ready?
Okay. All right. So you can hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about that experience? So you went and you wrote the first book, the memo. You got an unfortunate response from folks. Tell us, what was that about?
Yeah, so as many of us know, we tend to read, if you are Black or Brown or a woman of color, you read a lot of business and career books that don't necessarily have your experience in them. Yes, there's a lot of good information that you can use, but we know that they're not talking about us. And that's a very hard thing to come away with every time you read a book. And so I wanted to, Toni Morrison, she said, write the book you want to read. And that's exactly what I did with the memo. I wanted Black and brown women, women of color, to be seen in the career narrative, not just asterisks at the end of somebody else's conversation. And at the time when I sold my book, there were 5 major publishers, and 4 of them said no to me because they said, like you said, that there was not an audience, that I wasn't famous, and that nobody would buy the book. And it was interesting because when you don't feel seen for your entire career, and then you have the publishing industry telling you that your experiences are isolated, that nobody's experiencing the things that I'm talking about, racism, macroaggressions, those sorts of things. But all you need is one sometimes. And one publisher who had similar faces around that table too said, you know what, we hadn't considered what the experiences of women of color would be like, and let's give it a chance. They were taking a chance on me, right? And I was taking a chance on them, and sharing our stories, and it went on to become a bestseller. And so we know our stories, we know our experiences, and I'm glad that I was able to tell some of those stories.
I love that. And I love the fact that you were able to keep going and you push forward. Oh, there you are. Hey, girl.
We made it. We made it.
Okay, we can see you now. We can see you now. So thank you for sharing that. So what made you, you wrote the first book, the memo, it was successful. You got a lot of response from women. What made you follow back with right within? How you going to win when you ain't right within? What made you do that?
You know the vibes. I had to do that because what I realized, Simone, was after 15 years in my former career, those cuts don't go away. That racism, that sexism, whatever ism that you've experienced, ageism, just because you've experienced it doesn't mean it just goes away. It starts to distort who you are. In the workplace, there's this common phrase that many people like to use: bring your authentic self to work. But when you've been assimilating, when you've been walking on eggshells your entire career, when you've been silenced, you don't know who your authentic self is anymore, because you never got to be that. I spent 15 years never being able to wear my hair the way I wanted, right? I couldn't wear it in braids, or it would be a topic of conversation on the agenda items, right? Those sorts of things. And you don't realize how damaging those things can be to you. And I actually wanted to give narrative to that, right? That just because Tom says the thing in the meeting and everybody else pretends that nothing was said, we still have to hold on to that. And as Lauren said, how you going to win if you ain't right within? We can't solve what our colleagues do, but we can make sure that we experience freedom from the things that we never should have been exposed to in the first place.
Yeah, I love it's a lot of people going right now because you talked about hair and how we show up in the workplace. We might decide to do a protective style one day, switch it up, and it becomes the talk of the office. And that's not what I did that for. So I appreciate you for saying that. So in Right Within, you open up with a beautiful dedication, and what you say is dedicated to all the Black women who were told that they had to be strong for someone else instead of for themselves. So Minda, I wonder, when you talk about Black women in this book, and this is about healing from workplace trauma, what are you talking about? Black women only in corporate spaces, or are we including our sisters that might be bartenders or hairstylists or another sort of career path? Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about anybody who has ever felt like they have had their dignity and humanity stripped away, or they've felt less than, or felt like they don't belong in the spaces that we are in. And I'm one of my another favorite writer of mine is Audre Lorde, and she says, beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it. And I realized that as Black and brown women, as women of color, we deserve humanity, dignity, and respect. That should be table stakes, right? Our colleagues get that for free. Why don't we get that, right? And I wanted to be able to talk about that, but mostly I wanted us to have the conversation because so many of us have normalized the treatment. We've told ourselves that Tim doesn't mean any harm, just like they've told us. We've heard that, oh, that's just Becky being Becky, right? But two things can be true at the same time. Yes, they might not have intended harm, but the impact of that for all those years, even if it's just a day or an hour, is damaging to us. And I want us to talk about it so that we don't normalize it anymore. That treatment is not okay. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that because, Simone, I told myself that this is just the way that it is for Black women at work. And I accepted that. I put my seatbelt on and I said, okay, let me see if I can get to retirement and get the gold watch, right? and I realized that I could not get to the gold watch.
I think that's so powerful what you say. And I think in the memo, you also talk about how, you didn't realize that these issues were going on until Trayvon Martin. I mean, you didn't realize the severity of these issues. So I'm wondering, because language in words is so important, right? When we have words to associate with the things that we're experiencing. So you use the word racialized trauma a lot in the book. What does that mean? And can you give some practical examples of what that could look like? Because again, there might be some women in the room today that are experiencing that, but don't know there's a word associated with what I'm experiencing.
Exactly. I chose to use the word trauma and racialized trauma because for so long, at least in my experience, I never felt like I could say racism out loud at work without there being like some scarlet letter on my forehead. And I wanted to be able to give language to that because you can't conquer what you're not willing to confront. And if we never call the thing a thing, then it's really hard to get to a state of healing, a state of understanding. And my first manager, I'll say this, there wasn't a day in my 15-year career where I didn't experience racialized trauma, but two examples of it is my first manager, we'll call him Chad for today. He saw that I had burnt orange fingernail polish on. And he said, "You people love your bright colors." And he went on to joke for 15 minutes about how Black people like bright colors. I'm the only Black woman working at this firm. And those were things by my manager. And he would go on to say those sorts of things each and every day. And that started to damage me. And so I never wore bright colors again at work because of that statement, right? I wanted to come away from that. And I didn't realize at 23 years old how damaging that would be throughout the rest of my career. Another situation is my name. Minda is short for Yasminda. But I was acutely aware of when I even started working in corporate America that I needed to use a name that would make my white colleagues comfortable, that they wouldn't be fearful of saying my name. So all of these different sacrifices and concessions that we have to make before we even get to do the job. And you don't realize that racialized trauma, how it affects me. So yes, I'm not the Black woman. I'm not the angry Black woman in the workplace, but I sure as heck might take that home with me, right? And people who are with me each and every day, they might not get the best of me because I haven't been exposed to the best. And so that trauma that we hold on to isn't just affecting us emotionally, sometimes the health, but it also, the people who love us the most don't get the best of us because we have been harmed.
Wow, that was powerful. And I keep going back to what you said, and we've normalized it so much because for us culturally, we just kind of keep going. This is normal to us. And that is the problem. And that's why I find this right within so powerful, Minda. So I want to talk about, you started to talk about how, this book is talking about how racialized trauma impacts us, but it doesn't just affect us at work. Well, our experiences at work, again, as you said, we take it wherever we go. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of allies. And so if you can actually start with allies in the workplace, because when I was reading this, and in the book you talk about how you didn't acknowledge your coworkers who heard the remarks in the staff meetings that didn't stand up for you and didn't say anything. Can you talk a little bit about the role and what you learned after the fact about our allies in the workplace? And then also I want to get into again how how the role of the community in terms of supporting Black women, their experiences in the world. So if you could just start with talking about allies in the workplace.
Yeah. Well, when I was in my former life, Simone, we didn't have the name allies, but so it's interesting. Like again, the language is really interesting, but I'm sure all my colleagues saw themselves that way, right? But what I started to think about was the moments inside the meetings where I'd have a colleague say something egregious and everybody pretended that it didn't happen, and then after the fact, I'd have people who I thought were coworkers, who were friends that I'd go to happy hour with, that they had no problem asking me to buy, cookies for their kids, those sorts of things. But when it was time to show up for me, they were never there, right? Or they would come to me after the fact behind closed doors and say, "Oh, Minda, you're so strong. I can't believe John said that." And then they'd move off. And I used to find some comfort in them coming, because when you are the only or one of few, you start to question if these things are really happening, if you're going crazy, right? Did they mean that thing? And so when someone does at least come and affirm you, because oftentimes no one will in the workplace, they would come and say that. And I used to think, oh, okay, well, they seen it too. So, okay, this did happen, right? And I used to kind of give them a hall pass. But after I started to get some healing in my bones, I realized that they were just as much at fault as John was, because they didn't say anything. They were complicit in it. Recently, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but there was a video circulating around with a white woman that won an award, and she had some negative things to say about Venus and Serena Williams. And what I thought about is that room was allegedly full of allies, right? But when she was saying those hurtful and harmful things to the Williams sisters in that room, there were so many people clapping and cheering, right? And I thought about how damaging that is, and how many of us are Venus and Serena in the meetings that we're in, right? People will laugh, people will snicker, and you don't realize how that affects the person. Again, Tim might not have meant harm, but how does that impact the person that's always on the receiving end? So the role of allies, if we have any allies out there today, I ask yourself this question: who is being a beneficiary of your allyship? Because if nobody's benefiting from your allyship, can you really say and call yourself an ally? So if no one is benefiting, then we need to move from passive to active, right? Because we're not going to change the workplace if nobody ever benefits from the things we say we want to be. And so for me, I don't like to use the word allies. I say success partners. Let's partner with people on the road to success. What would it look like if that moment when I was 23 years old, that was the first jarring moment, but I went on to have many more. But there was a colleague that was there when my manager made the comments about Black people liking bright colors. I often think back to that moment of, what if my colleague would have had some courage, right? Would have had some courage in that moment to say, "Hey, Chad, we don't joke around like that," right? And affirmed me in that moment. Or even going to him and saying, "I know you might not have meant harm, but think about how that landed on Minda. I just wanted to make you aware of that." Or let's do a mind blow here, Cleveland Public Library. What if my colleague would have went to HR on my behalf and said, "You know what? I noticed that there's been some racialized comments being said, and I just want to document it." Not always us having to carry that heavy burden. And so in allies, who's being a beneficiary of your allyship? You don't have to save the day, but you have to do something.
It's so interesting what you say about, having someone that would go to HR on your behalf. I mean, the thought of it just sounds like, oh, like, could that actually happen? Could it be? And so, and just the peace and the comfort in that level of support, and Black women don't tend to get that. I mean, has anyone in here experienced that kind of allyship? Yeah, I see a couple hands. So, so I want to talk about the community. We talk about people who support Black women, not just at the water cooler or through a text message like, "Yeah, they were wrong." No, I want to talk about the community and leaders in the community that are working actively to support Black women. And so we're here at the Cleveland Public Library. 100 and over 150 years old. This historic, beautiful building. And just a couple months ago, I think it was last month, where Director Thomas was at the City Club with City Council President Blaine Griffin, and he talked about Black women and talked about how the library, is a resource and a support for all marginalized communities. But I want to read a quote from Blaine Griffin. And in the middle of that conversation, he paused and he said, "Black women should be the priority. because Black women in this city are suffering, and we need to wrap our arms around Black women in this city. Minda, can you talk a little bit about how the support for Black women looks in terms of folks in the community? What's the role of the community in supporting Black women?
Well, first off, I applaud that comment because that's the type of revolutionary language we need to be using, and we need to prioritize Black women. There should never be a state that or a city that Black women shouldn't be able to thrive in, right? And so I think that it's important that we do center Black women and have these conversations, but not only that, not just the articulation, but the demonstration, right? Because we do need that hug, we do need that support, we do need the action. Dr. King said we don't want to just be in the dialogue, but we want to be in the monologue too, and so it's very important that we have leaders who are using their privilege. I often think about it from this perspective. When I was younger, my parents, I come from very humble beginnings, but my parents would take me and my brothers, I have two brothers, on a trip once a year, and we would go to this amusement park, and we would drive 3 hours to get there, and 3 kids in the back. If you have kids or grandkids or you're guardian of someone, you understand the drama that occurs in the back seat with kids. And I would always be on the hump, the middle seat, right? And my dad, he would always be driving the car, so that meant that we always listened to Al Green there and back, pretty much, and then he had control, right? And then my mom, she would always be in the passenger seat, and we drive 3 hours to our destination. And when we get out of the car, my dad and my mom would always say, "Wow, wasn't that such a great car ride?" And when you're a young kid, a Black kid, you don't talk back to your parents. But I used to think inside my head, were they in the same car? We were riding in the same car and having a different experience, right? And so it made me think about the workplace. Many people never know what it feels like to sit on that hump. They only have access to the front seat. They only get to drive. They have people who always sponsor them, always speak their names in the rooms that they're not in. And oftentimes Black and brown women never get an opportunity for that. Our experience is always on the hump, right? Two things can be true at the same time. We could be in the same place and experience it differently. And I think in order for us to move forward, we have to have people that understand that our situations are not the same. And what does it take? What do Black women need to be successful? That means asking us what we need, right? That means putting us in the driver's seat so that we know where to go, right? Trust Black women, trust women of color. And so I think it's really important that we have, leaders like that in the community, CEOs, managers who are invested in our success. The last thing I will say, when I was doing my research for my first book, The MEMO, over 70% of women of color felt like their managers were not invested in their success. And I don't know about any of you, but anytime that I had a promotion, it was mainly because my manager was invested in my success. So if Black women and brown women don't feel like they have that, then that's a problem, right? So we need that investment. We need people who've had agency in the front seat to say, what would it look like to bring more into the front? And so I do think it's that demonstration that's really going to change the tide.
Yeah, I love that. And such a great way to think about it, being on the hump. Nobody wants to be on that hump. So you talk about this was probably one of my favorite parts in Right Within, and it was so interesting because again, you take us to a dreamland, and you say this is what it would look like if we were in equitable spaces as Black women in the workspace. And so you talk about equity advocates. I mean, when I read this, I sat up, and actually let me just rewind by saying, with the book should be sold with like a 5-pack of highlighters, because you highlight the whole book. But there's a part in here where you talk about equity advocates. What does that mean? And tell the audience what that could look like in the work.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I was thinking about, what do we need to really change the workplace? Because the workplace is not working for everybody, right? There was a statistic that came out last year around Black employees, and this one company did a research study on the effects of working from home and those sorts of things and belonging. And one data point that has stuck with me ever since I read the report was that 50% of Black employees did not feel like they belonged at their company or organization until working from home. And that's a sad number, that over half of Black employees didn't feel like they belonged until they worked from home, because they didn't have to experience every day all day microaggressions. Didn't mean that they weren't experiencing them virtually, but they didn't have to at every turn, right? They had a little psychological safety in their own homes. And when I think about that, I think about we can't go back to normal, but we have to go back to better. So what does better look like? And I know that we say, oh, we have allies, we have people who will show up for us, but we've seen that that's not always the case, right? If you leave showing up for people in the hands of other people, we'll still be talking about this same situation next year. And so I thought about the revolutionary acts that need to happen, demonstrations inside the workplace. So I can't count necessarily on my colleague to say the thing, because saying the thing means courage. And one definition of courage is the ability to do something that frightens one. And I know not everybody is courageous, right? It might take small acts of courage before they get there. And I understand that. So with that said, I introduced this concept of equity advocates, meaning that we actually have people on the ground inside the companies who are there to show up for people. So if I am experiencing racialized trauma or any type of trauma inside my meetings, for example, for me, team meetings were very much a trigger area. That's when crazy things would always get said most of the time. And so what if I had somebody in that meeting that was there and they were there to support me or support anyone there? That is their job, right? They don't have to worry about if they're going to get fired. They don't have to worry about all of those. But we have people who are on the ground in the spaces to make sure that equity is happening. Equity can no longer be opt-in. Equity has to be mandatory. So what are we willing to do to make the workplace safe for everybody? And I believe that equity advocates could be one actionable solution.
I absolutely love that. Equity advocates in the workplace. You also talk about a pledge that you want to see managers take. Can you talk to us about the pledge, and why did you want to focus on managers in the workplace?
Yes, great question, Simone. I realized that a lot of harm over the past several years that I've been doing this work is that a lot of harm being caused to women of color in the workplace happens by their managers at times, not only. Again, maybe unintentional, but it's still happening. And so I also wanted to talk about what that looks like, because I do a lot of consulting at companies, and I'll have these closed door conversations with leaders who are predominantly white, and they'll make statements like, well, I'm not comfortable talking about race, or I'm not comfortable calling someone by their preferred pronoun. And I'll say, well, then you probably shouldn't be managing anymore then. There's no way you can be an equitable manager if you're not comfortable having conversations with the Black and brown people on your team, right? It's just not possible, right? And so I think, again, in those situations when managers don't feel comfortable, what tools do they need so that they can lean into that, so they do feel comfortable? And so I'm asking every manager inside the book, and if you go to my website, mindaharts.com, I have a pledge that I'm asking managers to take, really anybody, but we're committing to everyday acts of equity. We're all human. We will make mistakes, but can we recommit to it, right? Can we acknowledge that we all have biases, but let's educate ourselves. Let's listen. Let's make sure that we're investing in everyone's success. Oftentimes, Black and brown women of color, we don't get the privilege of managers looking like us. So you hear people say, oh, they remind me of my younger self. We don't often get that privilege, right? So we need equitable managers. They're invested in every single person on the team, not just people that, go golf with them, not just people that, remind them of their daughter or things of that sort. So we need to make sure that we are holding our managers to a higher standard, because the reality is, if managers aren't invested in the success of women of color, then that prohibits us from moving up the ladder. And I do believe the reason why we only have 1.4% of Black women in the C-suite is because we don't have managers invested in our success.
1 point, yes, definitely claps. So lots of claps going on in here. 1.4% of Black women in the C-suite. I just, Minda, it's when you read this book, Right Within, when you read the memo, it's like, you do such a beautiful job of writing. And again, I open by saying, I feel like, you're my bestie in my head, because, you love Beyonce, I love Beyonce, and all the things. And, it's people will read this, you'll get fired up, where you're ready to, you feel like you've gotten the fuel that you need to keep going. But you talk about what happens when you speak truth to power. And so I want to spend some time talking about sort of managing how, to respond to this information. For some people, again, this is the first time that they have language to associate with what they've been experiencing every day. This is the first time that they're realizing there's a reason why I'm tired, truly tired. So you talk about how to, and I'm gonna get into some of the audience questions in just a moment here. We had some questions as folks were registering, so I'm gonna get into that. But I want to ask you, Minda. You have a chapter called Healing. I had to get it out because this is Healing While in Hell. So yes, because some of us are like, okay, all of this sounds good, but I need my job. I can't leave my job today or tomorrow or next year. So what am I supposed to do? So Healing While in Hell, Minda, talk to us. What is that chapter about? What are some of the practical tips that you give women?
Yes, well, thank you for that. And you're right. Many of us are at our place of employment for a reason, and we can't leave right now for whatever reasons, or we may never be able to leave because we're there for, again, whatever reasons that we stay. But I don't want anybody to think that your healing isn't possible from right where you sit, right? Healing is not a one-time event, it's a lifestyle. And the situation that I talk about both in the memo and in Right Within, I was in hell, literally, and I could not leave for another 3 years. But I realized that my mental health was still very important, and I had to figure out, how do I make work for me while I'm here, right? No longer trying to make it work for everybody else, but what do I need to do? How do I reclaim my power? And I thought about the line by, if anyone's familiar with this author, Toni K. Bambara. She said, "Sweetheart, do you really want to be well?" And I asked myself, Minda, do you really want to be well? And I figured out, what does that mean for me to be well right from where I sit? And part of that was giving myself permission to create boundaries, right? I used to be so upset with certain coworkers, and I realized, you know what? They don't even know that you're upset, Minda, because you haven't actually had a conversation with them about what they're doing. And so I gave myself permission to create boundaries, but then I also started to create tools to help me through the day. So one, quickly, is something in the book called the affirmation pyramid. And that was one of the things, because I'd always be stuck on the fact that nobody said anything or nobody acknowledged when somebody said or did something egregious. And then I realized, again, I could take my power back, and I could affirm myself that I no longer had to wait on somebody else in the room to tell me that it was racism or whatever ism. I know when disrespect is happening, and part of my healing is acknowledging that. And so the first step, it's a 5-step process that I talk about in the book, but one is taking a pause, right? I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. I don't have to react right away. Number 2 is I'm acknowledging it, because for so long, Simone, I wouldn't even acknowledge that these things were bad, right? Or that these things were harmful. I would just say, oh, that's just how it is. Normal day at the workplace, right? So I wouldn't even acknowledge that these things were harmful. And so that next step in my healing process was acknowledging. I may not say it out loud. I may not go to HR. I may not go to my manager, but I can acknowledge it to myself. That's part of my healing, affirming myself. The next part is documentation. Oftentimes when we're in situations, we are the only or one of few. And so we're sometimes questioning if that thing was that thing. And so part of writing it down is for us, right? Again, we may never go to HR, but if you notice there's a trend happening, right? So when it does happen that somebody asks me about it, oh no, I felt like it was racism. No, actually at 10:45 on Tuesday, this is what got said. And then I can write that down. So I'm using that if I need it. But for my own mental standpoint, I'm actually able to see this pattern, right? So I know I didn't make it up. So sometimes we just need that for ourselves. The other part, 4, quickly, is redistribute. One of the things that I noticed, and I don't know if anybody in the audience does this, but I was a reformed ruminator, right? So when somebody would say something, I would ruminate on what they said. I'd play it like a Beyonce song on repeat in my head. I'd be like, I wonder why Chad said that. I take it from one meeting to the next, and I just be letting it internalize, which is causing me more trauma, right? And then I go home, or you're working from home, you are still thinking about it. You're cooking dinner, you get in bed, you can't even sleep because you're still thinking about what that person said. And you know what? Let's keep it 100%. Cleveland, can I keep it 100% real?
Girl, yes, you can.
The person that said the thing to you, they are no longer thinking about you. They done moved on. They're watching The Tinder Swindler. whatever the case is, and we're sitting here holding on to it. So we got to redistribute that energy. Prayer, relaxation, meditation, working out, healthy eating, channel that energy differently. Do not let that sit with you, because that is traumatic, and that creates chronic stress, which creates to early death for some. And then lastly, again, affirm ourselves. You didn't do anything to ask for that. You couldn't have worked harder. You couldn't have kept your head down. You couldn't have, you didn't rock the boat. Affirm yourself. What is that scripture? What is that quote? What is that you need to refill your cup? And again, a part of our healing is using our tools.
Whew. I mean, I don't even know what else to say. I mean, girl. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that came in from the audience before at registration. And what I found interesting was there were two themes, Minda, that came up in these questions. There were a lot of questions around, how do I use my voice? How do I use my voice as a Black woman? Which is ironic because people look at us and say, we're always talking. So that was one theme. And then the other themes was, how do I get support from other Black women? So I want to ask the first question that came in, and it says, what are the conversations that we need to be having across various groups of women of color that aren't happening now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is so I look at it this way. So right now we're in Women's History Month, and going back to the word courage, when I was at my deepest, darkest place in the workplace, I was sitting in my car, and I was crying in my car that day. It was in 2014, and I was crying. My lashes were on the ground. I had a horrible experience that day, and I just was at my wit's end. I didn't know what else to do, and I couldn't quit. And I just felt so upset because I'm a first-generation college student. I've done everything that dominant culture has required of me, and still I'm getting no humanity, dignity, and respect in the workplace. And I remember sitting in the car, getting ready to go home. It was on a Friday. And I'm just like, God, I don't know what to do. And I cried, not just for myself, but I cried for my great-grandmother. I cried for my grandmother. I cried for my mother, because we had all experienced racism in the workplace. And I get emotional about it now because there's so many of us that still have to experience that. And I just remember being so frustrated, thinking that I didn't have my voice, thinking that it was gone. And I remember turning on the radio, and Whitney Houston's "Where Do Broken Hearts Go" comes on the radio. And then I'm laughing and crying, and I said, God, you have such a funny sense of humor. And I thought about all the Black and brown women, all the women that came before me, and I am a beneficiary of their courage. I get to do things in this world that my great-grandmother never got to do. Many of us today get to have conversations about race that many of our elders didn't get to have. We are direct beneficiaries of their courage. And I asked myself in that car in 2014, Minda, who is going to be a beneficiary of your courage? I didn't have an answer at that time, Cleveland Public Library, but I was committed to use my voice so that somebody could be a beneficiary of it. And when I think about what we do to change it, we think about the next generation. Who is going to be a beneficiary of our courage? Are they going to inherit the same tears that we've had to cry? Or do they get to experience the workplace in a whole different way? And the only way that happens is if we continue to tell the truth. Now is our time. There's never been a time, I believe, at least in my living history, where we get to talk about race and gender in the ways in which we can right now. And if we don't use this opportunity to talk about it, elevate it, and hold people accountable, then the next generation does not get to benefit from that. And so not only do they get to benefit, but so do we. And so it's imperative that we use our voice. Each of us have a voice. We just have to decide how we want to use it.
Woo! Minda, your words are so beautiful. I felt your energy, and I've had that moment too many times where you, girl, don't make me start crying, where you think about the women that have come before you, and you think about the opportunity, and in that moment, you start to release the shame because you're upset because you didn't say anything about what happened in the workplace earlier that day. But you have to release that shame because, as you said, Minda, you be courageous in this moment so that nobody else has to experience what you experienced. Before you go, because this is a big day, you got a big day today, I want to ask you one last question. So we are opening tonight, at the Cleveland Public Library, the beautiful Cleveland Public Library, with you. The second half of our time today, we're going to be with two dynamic women from Enlightened Solutions. We have many beautiful Black women that are at the forefront of this work, that are leaders. Minda, can you leave advice for Enlightened Solutions and how the front line of, speaking about this work and speaking about, Cleveland being the worst city for Black women to live and work? What advice, Minda, do you have for them? And then what advice would you like to leave our beautiful guests with today?
Yes, well, again, thank you so much for your moderation. It's been a privilege to be in conversation with you. Again, thank you, Cleveland Public Library, for having me. I just want to thank the women who are using their voice, because we are currently beneficiaries of your courage. And so when you get down, when you have those moments in the car, I want you to think about all of us who are benefiting from your courage and continue to move forward, because you're a living legacy and we appreciate your work. And yeah, you're doing it. And so we are beneficiaries of it. And so again, when you think about it, you are leaving the workplace and Cleveland better than we found it. So thank you. And for those in the audience, again, I just want to leave you with one other thing. When I wrote this book, I thought about freedom. A definition of freedom that I like to use is no longer feeling confined. And I just want to ask you, what would freedom feel like to you? And as you start to think about that, freedom is tied to healing. What is it going to take for you to be your most healthiest self? I want you to experience the workplace. I want you to experience home. I want you to experience life the way that you should. And I want you to start to figure out, what does freedom look like for you? And take that small act of courage today. And I'm rooting for your healing. Thank you.
Minda, we can do better than that, Cleveland. Minda, thank you so much for your courage. I know you are a praying woman, so I pray that God continue to bless you, bless your voice, and know that you are a light, and know that you've created a space for us to begin to open and heal ourselves from all sorts of trauma that we didn't ask to be in these situations. But thank you for being a leader, and thank you for your courage. You are beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
The first half was amazing. I've heard many of you talk about how you were not familiar with Minda and now you want to get familiar with Minda. We talked about what the experiences are for Black women in the workspace. And so this second half, we're really going to drill in and talk about the experiences of Black women right here in our city, right here in Cleveland, Ohio. So in January 9th, 2020, Bloomberg City Lab released the article with the title, "What Livability Looks Like for Black Women." Yeah. They looked at the 42 largest metropolitan areas with more than 100,000 Black women residing for those rankings. So what they found was Cleveland, again, was the worst city for Black women to live and work. I'm getting ready to introduce our next group of speakers. They are from Enlightened Solutions. First, we have Chinenye and Nkemere, ChiChi, who is a strategic thinker. She has over 10 years of experience in community engagement, asset building, and advocacy. She holds a bachelor's in political science and African American studies from the Ohio State University, with a focus on race and electoral politics. She continued advocacy work as a Teach for America educator in Houston, Texas, serving Title I middle school students and their families. In addition, ChiChi brought in her professional experiences consulting in the sphere of public safety. She remains dedicated to progressive and radically inclusive equity in all spaces and for all people. Let's give some love to ChiChi. And she loves Cleveland. If you know ChiChi, she loves Cleveland and she loves Black women. So we are happy to have ChiChi here with us today. Bethany Studenic, a manager and who holds her bachelor's, managing director, who holds her bachelor's in social work, master's in social administration, and is recently a bar Juris Doctor. Bethany has over 10 years in community change experiencing, serving in a leadership role of highly visible social and research-based advocacy movements. In addition, Bethany has worked with a variety of diverse populations through direct experience, including survivors of domestic violence and families experiencing poverty. She is an accomplished fundraiser, government relations professional, community strategist, and former lobbyist, researcher and policy and analyst expert. The food was good. I can't even read no more, y'all. So with that, can we give a round of applause? I need you to give all of your energy to bring ChiChi and Bethany on stage from Enlightened Solutions.
Enlightened Solutions is a research, advocacy, and organizational change firm. We really work in 3 buckets generally. We start with advocacy for individuals, helping people navigate systems that are designed to exclude them, as well as research, which is what we'll be covering today, and then also systems change work, so working with organizations and systems that want to do better. Next slide, please.
So we have 3 main focus areas. We work with individuals, organizations, and we publish research. Again, a lot of the information that Minda was talking about in the first portion of our presentation tonight is going to be really connected to the work that we do here on the ground. First, we work with individuals. We help individuals that are navigating really difficult experiences in the workplace, but really in any system, healthcare systems, education systems. We help advocate for individuals. Next, we work with organizations that are struggling with equity and inclusion issues inside their workplace. We help with executive coaching, we help with creating policy, and more than that, we help to create an expansive version of what professionalism is in the workplace. And lastly, the reason that we're here, we publish research. When we started Enlightened Solutions, we really wanted to make sure that we are constantly talking about the experiences, the lived experiences of individuals that are experiencing marginalization. And that's what we're here today to talk about, Project Noir. Next slide. Cleveland has the dual distinction of not only being the worst city in America for Black women, but also being the poorest city in America. If we can pause on that for a moment, that means Black women in Cleveland have to do more with less. They are looking at their peers in other cities. I'm certain many of you all here are looking at your friends that live in Charlotte, that live in DC, that live in Atlanta, some that are living in Detroit, that are doing better, doing more, have more experiences with support in their workplaces, or more experiences with support in their professional spheres. Yet and still, the response to that, something that should be an emergency here in Cleveland, is anemic. We are constantly talking about the issues in Cleveland that are affecting Black women, but it is radio silence when our voices are not heard. When we are trying to speak up, our voices are silent. Next slide.
So Project Noir came about, like we said, after Cleveland was ranked the worst place in America for Black women. ChiChi and I sat down and had a conversation about that. And we were interested in how we could do something with this, right? Knowing that we're the worst place, okay, now how do we get out of that place, right? The other thing that we noticed when we sat down and talked together, ChiChi pointed this out right away, was this research didn't talk to any Black women anywhere. Nowhere in any of the best cities, in any of the worst cities, there's no discussion. This is all quantitative metrics. So it's things like graduation rates or rate of pay, things like that. So we're seeing the indicators of why Cleveland is ranked so low, but we weren't seeing why or how or what that's like or what the story is for Black women who are living here.
So why is this research important? There is a lack of representation. Large-scale quantitative data helps us understand where we rank, but it doesn't tell a Black woman exactly what that feels like when you are going through this in the workplace. Next, that lived experience is key. We believe Black women. Black women believe other Black women. We have to start talking about our experiences publicly so that these experiences can change. We want to be able to drive metrics of accountability in public, and to be able to shame those bad actors, those poor workplaces, into changing their workplaces.
So methodology, this is my jam. I am the data nerd on the team. I will try to keep this brief because I know it's not the most interesting part, but we really tried to come up with a methodology that would provide support, right, to each other's stories. We ran a pilot survey and we started kind of sourcing what are the general components of what we're seeing here? What kind of questions do we need to ask? What we learned in the pilot survey is that a lot of folks, while they've been through issues in the workplace, issues with healthcare, they're really reticent, individuals are reticent to say, right, that I've been a victim of this or I've survived this. We see this in lots of populations, but we definitely saw it here. Another barrier that we were running up against is that people don't have the words. We literally don't have the words to discuss this because it is so far under the radar, because we often avoid the conversation in polite spaces, right? So we redesigned our survey and then we got it back out, and the response was incredible. And this is all to ChiChi's credit on her community organizing experience. We had over 100 responses on the first day, which for a nonprofit, a little nonprofit in Cleveland, that's awesome, fantastic reach. We actually had to shut it down because we started getting responses from across the nation and we weren't equipped to do national data sets. But we got responses from over 450 Black women from our community, right? So, and these individuals shared almost 1,000 different stories of abuse, harassment, discrimination through these systems. And then what we did is we ran artificial intelligence on all of these comments. We looked to find the common themes. And what we started to find was that a lot of these problems are predictable, right? Which means that we can mitigate them. They're measurable. And what we really found was that individuals were running into feeling like their experience was isolated, but really hundreds of women, thousands of women are experiencing the exact same type of marginalization every single day in the city. So what Project Noir was really designed to do was help us understand what that looks like so that then we can create solutions that actually target what it's like to live and be excluded in a city that should be your home. This is a map of where we have everyone from. There are more data points if we zoom out a little bit or if we look national. But like I said, over 450 Black women responded. We shut down early. And the survey design is meant to reinforce each other's stories. When we talked to Project Noir participants and we sat down for hour-long conversations, often ended up being 2 or 3 hours, to go through what this marginalization looks like and really drill down into their experiences, we saw that all of these experiences mirrored each other. And so this study is meant to have your stories reinforce one another so that we can really drill down onto how and why marginalization functions specifically in Cleveland.
So we're going to go through this portion very quickly because the question and answer portion is really what we are most interested in. But we wanted to show some statistics from workplaces, healthcare, and education. Next slide. 77% of Black women that took our survey, Project Noir survey, were subjected to inappropriate comments about their hair, their features, their dress. By a show of hands, how many individuals at work have experienced this? Literally every single woman in here. 76% of Project Noir participants have been paid less than coworkers in a similar position. Show of hands, how many individuals? My God, exactly. Next slide, please. Here's a quote, we'll just read the second one. When a new director was hired, he met with others in my position to hear about their professional goals, right? But not me. He consistently scheduled times he knew that I was not available. This is a very common thing here in Cleveland, where Black women are excluded from their workplaces, excluded from meetings that are really, really foundational to their own professional success.
And this is something too that we often hear when we talk with HR departments or organizations. I don't know if you've heard this excuse, but the excuse is often given that someone is just a bad manager. They're not harassing, they're not discriminating. And the one thing I want to make very clear is that if someone is only a bad manager for you, It's based on your identity, right? So I want you to understand that because it's something that comes up almost every time we have this conversation. And I think this is a really good example of that. This woman, her team members were getting everything that they needed. They were getting goals that were reachable. They were getting conversations. They were getting their hands held. And whenever it came to her, this is how she was being treated. And HR said the same thing. Oh, he's just a bad manager. He's only a bad manager for her.
Next slide.
Healthcare. Okay, next slide, we're going to do a little bit of the statistics here. 60% of our participants felt that they were spoken down to about their health. Has anybody had that experience here? Show of hands. Okay, so generally what we're talking about here is women are, if you're sick, right, you're already not having a great day. Then you got to call off work. Then you got to find your doctor, then you got to go in, then you've got to explain it, right? This is something that's costly. You're paying your copay, you're taking time off, you're missing work, you're figuring out what to do with your kids. And then what's happening is Black women are coming into these conversations and doctors are saying, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you're in that type of pain. I don't believe that your pain is as intense as you're telling us. I don't believe you, right? We also see problems with diagnostics. What will happen is they'll say, you're not in that pain, and so I'm not going to even run a test. This is something that's life or death for women in our region, and this is why we see disparate lifespans, right? This is one of the contributing factors, is that very simply, people are coming in and saying, I need help, and we're saying no, right? The other component is 41% of respondents have been told that their health issues are not real or made up. This is just direct gaslighting about your own body, right? And when we compare these percentages, whenever we talk to people, if this room was full of white men, that percentage would be a lot lower. It does happen to other people. It's happening much more often and much more extremely for women of color.
I'll take a second, yes. So for years during my teens, I talked to doctors about my irregular periods. They told me to lose weight. I didn't receive treatment for my PCOS until my early 20s when I left Cleveland and found an Asian doctor who listened. This woman had to leave Cleveland to be able to get pain management for an extremely painful issue, a healthcare issue, a sexual healthcare issue, and had to literally leave the city that she is from to be able to get adequate care. I don't know if you all understand that we live in the nexus of three of the most sought after healthcare institutions here in Cleveland. I'm gonna name them: the Cleveland Clinic, Metro Health, and University Hospital. This should be an embarrassment. This should be an embarrassment that individuals that live 20 miles down the road cannot receive adequate care. This is what is called dereliction of care. This is dereliction of care for individuals that should be able to get quality health care, that presidents are getting quadruple bypasses at, that heads of state are able to get cancer treatment at, but you can't get treatment for a very common but very painful sexual health issue. Next slide. And education. This one is my favorite as a former teacher. Next. 48% of Project Noir participants have been discouraged from taking classes in math and science. I know that when I was growing up in my experiences, I didn't have the best math and science teachers. I wasn't interested in math and science, that could have been an issue, but I also didn't have teachers that sat and invested in me and said, you can do better. You can actually do this a lot easier. And we understood this in Project Noir, that a lot of Black women here in the city were completely discouraged from taking these classes that could have, again, really solid effects generationally. Math and science, STEM degrees are really high-paying degrees. So 48% of Black women are being discouraged from that. That's a generational issue. That's an economic issue. And I want every single one of you all to make that connection. Next, 56% were steered into lower-paying professions other than to pursue their passion. How many of you all have been pursued into different professions, maybe by a guidance counselor, maybe by a professional? Yes, individuals that are telling you maybe not that job, go for the lower job. Next. The one that's really shocking to me, the quote that's shocking, is the first one. I was told that Blacks do not pass the national exam I needed to take, although I had already passed a similar exam. Outright. Like, oh, your people just don't do that, right? Your people don't pass the exam. This is not something that happened in 1930-something. This is a woman that was taking this national exam in 2015. This is a woman that could have been walking the halls of the Cleveland Public Library being discouraged from taking exams and being, again, her confidence being lowered because of the preconceived biases of somebody that should have been her champion.
So Cleveland has an inclusion problem, not a diversity problem. This is something we are working with organizations to help them understand. Cleveland is a Black majority city. There are so many talented people of color inside this city that are not given access to the systems that they could bring so much to, right? What we often hear from leaders in the city is that we need to figure out diversity. We need more diversity in our organization. And what we are now saying, ChiChi and I, has been that we need you to start with inclusion. Because what's happening is you're bringing people in and then you're exiting them. You're marginalizing them and then you're exiting them. Another conversation we've been having, we get a lot of complaints, people saying, well, we're not getting diverse applicants. And we've been saying, do you know what your reputation is? Have you asked, right? And a lot of people are shocked when we say, the reality is that you've been in this cycle of violence for so long. You have been marginalizing people for so long that people in the city know that they have no chance of succeeding with you, right? There is no ability and there's no pathway for someone to thrive inside your organization. And so they say, don't try, right? So what we're really trying to help people understand is that Cleveland has no shortage of diversity and brilliance. There are innovators here. There are people, I've been saying, the next $1 billion patent could come from here, and it should. There are amazing people doing amazing work here, but the reality is that we're not inclusive. The number one thing that came out of Project Noir was microaggressions. Microaggressions and daily disrespect and dehumanization. That is the major theme of what women are trying to show here.
The first thing that happened is I sent it to every single one of my Black girls in chat. Mm-hmm. And many of those women are in this audience right now. I sent it to Whitney, I sent it to Devonna, I sent it to every Black woman that I knew. Mm-hmm. And the resounding reaction was, yeah, girl. Like, of course. But more than that, deeper than that, the scientist, the research portion part of my brain said, okay, so what are individuals going to be doing about this? And more than that, who has spoken to these Black women? Mm. And when I sent it to Bethany, we started doing research. I'm telling you, I emailed the journalist that wrote this article so many times, I'm certain I'm on a block list. I emailed the research scientist out of University of Pittsburgh so many times asking, have you talked to any of these Black women? Like, who is going to do the project about this? Mm. And the fact of the matter is I kept saying who, and then after a while Bethany is like, it's gonna be us, you know that, right? Wow. Like, you know it has to be us because we were like, it was like a dog with a bone. Mm. I would not stop until other people knew about this and we knew how to ameliorate this issue.
Wow.
Yeah, I would say I wasn't really surprised after working in Cleveland and working in different diverse communities. I know that Cleveland is often near the bottom of these metrics, but the researcher in me also looked at this and said, you know, if we're going to try to actually solve this, if we're going to try to actually do something about inequality, what better place than Cleveland? Mm. Because if we can solve it here, we could solve it literally anywhere. Wow. Right? We are the bottom. And also, because we're here and we're near the bottom or we're at the bottom, our issues are more pronounced, right? And so it makes it the perfect area to start the work. ChiChi and I say all the time, we're not interested in solving the easiest problem. We want to solve for the hardest problem first, and then you move out from there. I say often, when Black women are doing well, I'll be doing well. You don't need to be solving for me. Solve for Black women, and you will solve for me in the process.
Wow. Yeah, let's clap for that. So I'm wondering, just by a show of hands, how many people first had not heard about that Bloomberg article until you walked into the room today? Couple hands. How many people had not heard about Project Noir before you walked through the doors today? Wow. Okay. So I want to, Bethany and ChiChi, I want to hear what was your goal in releasing this piece, and then how has the response been? So, you know, again, we're talking about these issues and we're giving tools today. Minda in her book talks about, you know, what happens when you speak truth to power. What has the response been? And again, first, if you could start with what was your goal?
She wants me to do the goals because I'm going to say something about the response. Our goal really at the time, well, we never really have one goal. We're trying to do a lot with every project that we do. But I would say our major goal was to give a voice, right? We over and over and over again hear these statistics. We hear that Cleveland is not doing well. And ChiChi and I remember saying, like, I just don't want to sit through another forum where we talk about it and we do nothing. And I also remember saying, I just want to design something that actually answers the questions that we have. And at the time, we were looking at DEI research in general, and we really felt like the research questions weren't even calibrated to get to the heart of the issue, right? We're asking the wrong questions, and we're asking the wrong people. We should be talking to Black women and lifting up what that experience is, because if we don't know what it is, we can't solve for it. If we can't measure it, we can't intervene. If we won't confront it and name it and look at it very in depth, we will never move forward. And that's the reason we're not moving forward in Cleveland. We continue to talk around the issue than actually about it.
With response to Project Noir, it's twofold, right? So from Black women and women in general, the response has been a resounding just a celebration, right? Individuals have just been so warm and so open about how happy they were that this research was out there, that they were given words and verbiage for a lot of the marginalization and a lot of the racism, misogyny, misogynoir that they had experienced. And we get our deepest and best support from Black women constantly. Now, outside of that, the response with, let's say, business leaders, philanthropic leaders, corporate and nonprofit has been radio silence. And it's funny because we're in the same rooms as these people. I know these people. I've gone to school with their children. I know they see the work because I watch the social media metrics and I know who's clicking what. But more than that, I know that they know that this work is important. But Cleveland suffers from what I think is a paralysis of innovation. We are so afraid to do the risky thing in Cleveland. We get this all the time in meetings, right? Where an organization A will say, okay, well, where's your 10 years of research that proves your point? And when I have to tell them that 10 years ago I was at Ohio State drinking Four Locos, they laugh. But then more than that, they're like, okay, well, what about 5 years ago? Well, I was in Teach for America. Okay, so why not start today? So that in 10 years, you're not asking these questions again. Mm-hmm. Why not start today so in 10 years, you have something to be proud of? Because what I know for a fact is that you cannot be proud of these metrics. You cannot be proud of the very incremental success that we've had here in Cleveland. You can't. Because again, these issues are generational. The thing about Project Noir is that we've interviewed Black women, millennials, their boomer mothers, and their silent generation grandmothers. We've had many women send this to the women in their families, and they have the same issues. Why should we still be suffering under the same exact issues that my mother, her grandmother has experienced in 1962? That's ridiculous and it's shameful. And more than that, we should be looking at this as an urgent call.
3 generations. Yeah. That when I remember the first time I heard that, and I got a lump in my throat. Because, it just angers you that we have to experience this generation after generation after generation, and why? So when I saw Project Noir, when I read the piece, I saw myself in it, I saw my friends in it, and there was this dual feeling of, wow, I feel seen, but I'm also like, man, why? So I wonder if, in reading it, there are the 3 themes, right? So there's health, career, and education. Is there an order in which we should prioritize how we tackle these issues? And if so, why? And some people in the audience might be thinking, yeah, we need to talk about health right now. So I'm just curious.
So I kind of think of it, I go into my, kind of therapy mindset. I think about how we can empower people. And with this, I think that there is I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm having trouble.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, so just
I had something and it left.
in terms of so there's a lot that you all have in the piece, right? So there's the 3 different themes that you cover. There's education, there's career, and health. And so I wonder, when I read it, I'm like, I feel like all of these need to be addressed right now. But, we all have different ways of approaching this work. So I'm wondering, is there one that stands out as the first one that we need to address?
I remember when we started building the project, and ChiChi and I really thought that workplaces were going to be the hotbed of issues. And part of that is because workplaces your work dictates so much about your life, right? Your money dictates so much about your life. It dictates your healthcare access. It dictates your educational access. And so we thought that was where we were going to start. As we started having direct conversations with women, though, we realized that healthcare is incredibly important. And I remember thinking at the time, like, as a therapist, I should have thought of this because it's the basic needs, right? This is life and death. These healthcare problems are life and death. And a lot of women shared, just incredibly traumatizing stories about being in their most difficult moment, in their most painful moment, and then having this added on top of it. Not to mention at some of the most world-renowned institutions in the world, right? What we see is we see this as something that's very interconnected. So there's no way for me to say, like, if we solve one, we're going to solve all of them. But the reality is that we do need to prioritize healthcare in a really real way, particularly as we're marketing ourselves nationally as a healthcare hub. We need to be thinking about the reality that we are a Black majority city, healthcare hub. We're failing Black women. How is that possible?
I think if you look at healthcare, it just touches all of it, right? So with healthcare, to be an individual that's within the healthcare system, it's also a workplace. You also have to be educated, whether it's on the job training or you need to be formally educated. So it touches so many different portions of it, and then also you are a recipient of it, right? You are an individual that will be able to go through that system and through your workplace. So again, it becomes very cyclical when you start to pinpoint healthcare and draw it out from there.
That makes sense.
There's another point there. Sorry, just to jump in. The education component, what's really interesting is that when we talked with women who were in the silent generation, they told us that they saw education as the great equalizer, right? They saw this as, if you get educated, you will have the same opportunities as anybody else. And in our conversations, they shared that over time, they realized that that was not the case, right? Education was not the answer. But what they said was, at the time, that was priority number 1. So that's part of the reason that we kind of shy away from saying, do you start somewhere? The reality is we need to solve all of it. We need to solve for all of it.
Solve for all of them. So, I look at the two of you and I see courage, I see bravery, I see leadership, I see so many amazing things. And I wonder, what other women are out there speaking on behalf of Black women? Are there other organizations that are doing this work?
The one thing that first and foremost, I thank God every day that I was born a Black woman, so I wouldn't have to be imitating Black women. Sorry, girl. So, but more than that, Black women have this innate ability to find community wherever they are. So it truly doesn't matter here in Cleveland what industry you're in. There is a Black woman at the center of it that is pushing, right? Pushing for the people that are coming up behind her, pushing for the individuals that are fighting against her even. So when I look at Cleveland, I know that we know the names, right? We know the individuals, the Evelyn Burnett's, we know the Jasmine Longs, we know the Erica Merritt's, the Erica Longs, like we know these women by name, but there are also women that are just doing this work every single day and they will never receive that recognition. So to me, being a Black woman and being in community with Black women is the individuals that are billed at Marquee and the individuals that you may be passing in the hallway, but are constantly working and that are constantly pushing for us to have a more equitable society and for us to actually live up to the words that are written in our Constitution.
I couldn't have said that better. This is why they are here. ChiChi, what you said was, Black women are at the core of these businesses and organizations working and normalizing their fatigue and not even thinking about how they haven't even stopped to just pause and take inventory on their feelings. Bethany, I want to ask you this question. When we talk about allies, and we talked about it a little bit earlier with Minda, what role do white women play in wielding their power in supporting Black women? Because again, Black women, we just are who we are. But the reality is we can't do it alone.
Yeah.
So what are our white women's role?
I've gotten a lot of questions about this from white women too, right? This is something that women are struggling with. I would say that the role, and that we talk about often, is that this isn't some title that you put on your LinkedIn or something, and you just say, I'm an ally, and do nothing, right? To Minda's point, it's who's benefiting. ChiChi and I say that allyship is a verb. It's something you do. It's not something you are, right? You can be an ally one day and not be an ally 2 days later, right? Allyship is a practice. It is a lifestyle. I think that, in my conversations with white women, I try to impress upon them that there's a lot of trauma that is preventing them from being the advocates that they need to be. They have a proximity to the abuse that is perpetuated by these systems that we have not really reckoned with. White women in general, I think, are highly controlled in a lot of ways. And we often, in organizations, we see them being pushed to deal with these problems, to be the face. What we often see is that white women will be brought up in an organization, and then whenever there's some sort of diversity problem, that it's her issue to deal with, right? And the men around her say, this is basically a test, right? Are you going to side with us, or are you going to side with them? And so what we're seeing a lot for white women, and what I'm talking with them about, is courageousness, right? Getting out from under the boot we've lived under forever. But also healing your own trauma, because you can't be helpful whenever you're not recognizing how these systems are decimating you in the process, right? So helping people move forward from that, helping them understand that it is a practice, helping them understand that this is not something snazzy to put on Instagram. This is very serious, right? This is life and death. And also knowing that, and I've said this before, the process of Project Noir, Enlightened Solutions, that was my healing from what I've been through. Healing can be advocacy. Advocacy can be healing. And so for the women that hear this, the only thing I can say is that we need to prioritize this in a way we never have before.
So let's spend some time talking about what will it look like when we've arrived at equity, when we've arrived at the point where we feel, like this feels good. I feel seen, I feel heard. How will we know we're there? What does that look like?
Ooh, that is a very, very hard question. Because the historian portion of my brain is like, well, America as a country has to heal its own racist past before we can actually start moving any of these metrics in any kind of real way. But that is a whole nother conversation that we can have. But I think that we can arrive to the closeness of equity when individuals that are the most proximate to the problem have the microphone, right? There is a phrase that I use all the time, and I say it in almost every single speaking engagement that we have. It's an Igbo proverb. I'm Nigerian American, I'm Igbo. And it says, those who live in the attic know where the roof leaks, right? You can't be the person living on the first floor telling me, the person that lives in the attic, exactly where the water is dropping on my head. You will never be able to tell me that. So what I believe is the closest that we can get to equity is when, again, the individuals that are most proximate to that problem have the microphone and have the unencumbered financial resources to be able to fix those problems. Black women do not need saviors, we need advocates. Black women do not need saviors, we need money. Black women do not need saviors, we need to be able to be in print, in our own words, in the newspaper, on social media, at the forefront of our own marginalization and of our own problem to solve these issues. Because without that, we get written out of our own story.
That's so good. That's so good. And it reminds me of a piece in Project Noir where you all talk about after George Floyd, many Black women were asked to be the lead of DE&I initiatives in their companies, and they never even asked for it. So somehow this Black woman is now being asked to speak on behalf of her community with no resources, no additional pay. So I so appreciate that. Bethany, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I was going to say, it's hard to picture because I think our world would look fundamentally different. Things like hierarchy are a problem right now. And the thinking process that goes into it leads to something has to be better than something else. Everything has to have a value. Someone has to win in everything. In reality, in solving the problems that we are facing here in Cleveland, but also nationally, globally, we have to start working together. Right? We're facing climate change, right? We're facing potentially the end of all of us, right? We need to start working together. This is not working. But at the same time, I think organizations they struggle to picture what that looks like. I think 2 years ago, we were saying, you need to have work from home. It's an equalizer. It helps.
Did not believe us at all.
No, they did not.
We were like, we have a work from home policy. They were like, why would we ever do that?
Right.
Well, if there's a public health crisis into existence.
It's your fault, actually. Yeah, that's what we really found is, and that our world looks entirely different because of one real change, which was work from home, right? And like we talked about earlier, that had positive impacts for people of color. It helped them be able to insulate themselves a little bit from the daily constant teardowns that they've been subjected to. So part of that, it's a really hard question to answer because I don't know what it looks like. I don't think anybody truly does, but I do know it doesn't look like a hierarchy. It doesn't look like someone controlling another for their own benefit. We are fundamentally valuing the wrong things as a society.
Wow. I want to just kind of pause and go back on something that you said, ChiChi, earlier about the city of Cleveland and our issue with innovation and having new ideas and doing things different. And for those in the audience, I know you know what I'm talking about. And so I want to talk about, our folks that are beauticians and they are nail techs and they are consultants or CEOs. What were some of the entries and stories like for their experiences here in Cleveland? Because again, I think we focused a lot on sort of corporate America, but how do we talk about those who are in other spaces and are working for themselves and may not have the tools and the resources to go to get the support that they need?
There's definitely a connection to that corporate space and that corporate sphere. One thing that we learned with Project Noir is that a lot of women that were working in either nonprofits or corporate organizations that ended up creating their own side hustles that became their full-time job is that they were exited from those positions.
Yeah.
Those organizations looked at them and they said, oh, you made one mistake? I'm going to document every single thing that you do until you are no longer in this job. And what ends up happening is that Black women not only get exited out of organization A, they get exited out of an entire industry. So if you're working in communication and you've been exited out of that job, you're exited out of that field. Everybody around you knows what happens. So that corporate connection to individuals taking their side hustle and making it into a full-time job is something that we saw in Project Noir. Now for the service industry, for gig economy, for contract work, what we have expressed to local leaders is that this is the new wave. It's been the new wave for the last 20 years, right? Millennials are really just, and again, millennials are not children. I have to remind many people that millennials are from the age of 27 to 41. So we are adults, right?
Sometimes.
But more than that, we have since graduating high school, we graduated during a recession. Then for those of us that went to college or those of us who went to those 4 years in between being a teenager and being a young adult, there was another recession, right? There's the Iraq War, that ended, that caused another bubble. Then 10 years later, we're in another recession. We are constantly working 1, 2, 3, 4 different jobs. And I hate to bring up what happened in my own family or in my own life, but it's the way that my sister and I look at our parents and we're like, no, we have to have multiple streams because we need to cobble this together to make one job. And what we learned from Project Noir participants is that Black women are so tired of having to cobble together so many different experiences to just come up with a whole. Especially, and I'm bringing it up today because today, if you don't know, is Equal Pay Day. Not for Black women though. Equal pay day for us is in August.
Right.
But we're a third of the way through the year, and we have just now made as much as white men made December 31st. Black women won't even reach that until later August. We are cobbling together too many experiences to just try to come up whole.
And I would add that the concerns change a little bit, right, based on where you're at. Now, microaggressions, they can come in a million different flavors. So there's not always, but there are types, right, that we can predict. But I would say one of the differences, for example, the difference between corporate culture and someone who's maybe in more of an entry-level position or a position that we call unskilled, even though it's highly skilled, is wage theft. Wage theft is the most common type of theft in America, right? It's
Wage theft.
Wage theft is your employer not paying you what you're entitled to, right? So they don't want you to clock in for 15 minutes of your shift.
They felt
right?
that, Bethany.
In case you don't know, right? So if that's happened to you, let me know. We know attorneys. And what we do right now is we do a lot of referring to attorneys, and we're also educating attorneys because I'm a baby attorney, I'm a new attorney, and I'm not impressed. Okay, I'm not impressed with a lot of the arguments that are being made. I'm not impressed with the organizations and attorneys actually advocating for people on the ground. And the excuse that we consistently get is that their recovery isn't enough. Well, they're not making enough money for me to justify suing their employer because I'm only going to get their wages back, and I make more than that, right? I'm an attorney. And so we see this disconnect. So part of what we're also talking about is how do we change policy? How do we give teeth to the rights that we already have? But wage theft is extremely prevalent with women in lower wage positions. When you get to corporate culture, the problem is that you're salaried and you're overworked. So you're getting every dollar that you're entitled to, but you're working 80 hours, right? Mm-hmm. And so the problem that we're seeing is that for Black women, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know, you go to corporate culture and you've got one problem. Mm-hmm. You think you're going to, take maybe an easier path or a simpler path or a more opportune path, and then you find, bam, wage theft, right? So there are different shades and flavors to how we think about it, but the concerns are similar.
Mm. So how can community members here today, how can they hold these systems accountable? So when they're in the workspace or they're in other spaces, how can they hold these systems accountable?
Yeah, well, first thing, if you feel that you're experiencing any kind of pushback, marginalization within workplaces, healthcare, or education, definitely get in contact with us. We are more than willing and it's essential to our mission to remain rooted to the community and community concerns. So if you have those concerns, definitely get in contact with us. But more than that, we need all individuals pushing at all points in time, right? Many hands make light work. We need, just like Minda stated, we need courageous individuals out there speaking up and speaking out. And we understand that comes at a great risk. We understand that. We say this every day. We're like, is this the day that the plain dealer is going to write about?
They're coming for us.
We're never going to have a job again. But more than that, we need this to change because I cannot imagine another decade of this happening here in Cleveland. I can't imagine the only headlines that we have about Cleveland are losing football team and the fact that we're the poorest big city in America. We can't go another 10 years. Especially a city that I love, and more than that, a city that I think has great potential. We're positioned, Bethany talks a lot about climate change because it's all interconnected, but we're positioned on a freshwater lake. That's going to be very important in the next 10 years. We have low cost of housing. That is a boom. You're seeing individuals in San Francisco, in Austin, Texas, in New York. They are suffering under a housing crisis that we don't particularly have. We have a lot of housing stock. So again, we should be capitalizing on our gifts. We should be capitalizing on innovation. And more than that, we should be courageous enough to push our own city forward, even if they're kicking and screaming in the process.
So I want to get into some of the questions that came in from the audience. The first question is, how do you navigate the challenges being a minority, woman of color, and first-generation immigrant without being burnt out? So burn out.
Yeah. So I am all of those. I am first gen and a woman of color. I think The burnout for me was drinking in the poison that I wasn't good enough. It was the imposter syndrome of seeing people that were extremely mediocre do better than me.
Woo, wait, can we pause for that? We gotta let that marinate in the air. Woo!
I'm just very honest. And one day I stopped. And it wasn't easy. Again, Bethany is a therapist. She's like my very close friend, but more than that, just through therapy and through letting go of a lot of the boundaries that I had put on myself, I was able to fly. Now, it's not going to be easy. I'm not an individual that says that like this kind of work is easy, but you do have to let go of those opinions, those ideas, that imposter syndrome, so that you can have a softer place to land. You can't internalize, just like Minda was saying, ruminate all day long about what Bob in accounting said to you, because guess what? You don't actually really care about what Bob in accounting, you don't care, you don't know him, like he doesn't know you at all. So you have to be a kind of individual that gets to tune that out, and more than that, find community, especially in Black women, where you can be filled, where your cup can be filled, and where your expertise is respected.
Find community, fill your cup. You use the word imposter syndrome. Bethany, what does that mean?
I'm great with definitions. Thank you. Imposter syndrome is really feeling like you don't belong in the position that you've earned, right? So imposter syndrome, we see, oh my gosh, so consistently in Project Noir. And what ChiChi's talking about, it's not, the frustration I have with this is that people are often said, like, you have imposter syndrome, not that it's been imposed on you. When you've been told over and over again that your fantastic work is not good enough, when you've been, oh my gosh, given feedback that is one thing and then it's another, right? It's the opposite end of the spectrum. I've gotten everything myself from you're far too aggressive to you really need to speak up more, right? It makes you crazy because the reality is that there's no right answer for you. Whatever you do, whatever step you're taking, it's going to get criticized. And so the thing I want to hold space for is you're not wrong to be feeling that way when you've been told that your entire life. But the reality is that you've been told it unfairly. You're very talented. And if you are in a position where you're able to make change, stepping into your power can really help you move things forward, move forward the conversation. But it can be hard. I think that oftentimes we're still given feedback where we're told, you need to step in, you need to lean into it. And the reality is that for a lot of people, that's not an option. If you lean in, you're told that you're aggressive. If you push too hard, you're told to slow down. And so the reality for imposter syndrome is that it can be really complex. I feel it all the time still. And it's something that I think we're still working towards, but I think it is learned and imposed. It's not something that is necessarily a failing.
You talked about lean in, and we had a conversation about it earlier, and you gave the PG version of it's not easy. That ish is not easy. So but there are some women and Black women who seem to navigate the workspace just fine. They maybe even some folks that are here with us today are thinking like, oh wow, that's interesting that I haven't had that experience. What is it? Is it that some of us are stronger and can handle navigating these spaces better than others? What is that? Why is it that some of us can handle it, and others have issues?
Do you mind if I jump in? Yeah. Okay. We talk a lot about trauma and how brains respond to trauma. And just like Minda said, our experiences are relative to us. You can be in the same room with someone and have a totally different take on what occurred in that room. What we know about trauma is that some people, some brains can be exposed to a trauma and have virtually no impact on their brain or neurology. For other people, it's going to have a major impact. So what we know about trauma and how it functions is that we can't predict it, and that your brain is going to internalize it in the way that it needs to. So when we go down to the neurological level, it's not predictable. But for some people, they may have a function of resiliency. There may be something in them, right, where they can compartmentalize this, or they can just move past it, or they don't ruminate about it. And more power to you. I'm so happy for you if that's your case. It's not my experience. My experience has been the rumination. My experience has been feeling really frustrated with the barriers in my path.
You also just don't know who's lying.
Very true.
You just don't know. Like, they may have like a super easy path, but when they close that door, they're crying every single night from sunset to sundown.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea the kinds of battles that individuals are fighting, and you never know what other individuals are able to let roll off their back. I don't let microaggressions roll off my back. I will directly challenge them because I don't want the women that are coming up behind me to experience the same thing. That doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. That doesn't mean that my road has been easier just because I speak up. I think you never know the kinds of roads that individuals are walking on and what they are going through behind closed doors.
I think that's so true, and we know that now more than ever when we've seen our recent Miss America, I think it was, who unfortunately committed suicide, and there was an article that was released, and it talked about high functioning depression and how Black women, surprise, are typically susceptible to that. So you see us Black women where we walk into church on Sunday morning, baby, you know, we look good, but how are we on the inside? And that's something that I talk a lot about on Soul to Soul podcast. Like, how are you doing that internal work so that you can thrive? So that's good. There was another question that came in where someone had a question about starting their own diversity and inclusion organization or focus group at their organization. So someone's wondering if they don't currently have a DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion organization within their organization, how do they get started?
Rule number 1, don't work for free.
Yep.
Say it for the people in the back, Bethany.
Don't do that work for free.
Don't do it for free.
Really, though, what we've seen, we talked about it, I think, a little bit, but what we saw in 2021 as a reaction to 2020, right? What we saw in 2020 with the racial reckoning, in 2021, we had more calls to our advocacy line than ever. And the number one complaint was, I'm being pushed into this ERG group or this conversation about race, or I've had a conversation about race, it went poorly, or I've put solutions out there and now my boss is mad at me for that. They've told me no. We talked to multiple women who were bullied, harassed after engaging in those conversations, and several who were terminated, right? So, and we're working on litigation with them, so making sure they have support. But what I want you to understand is the work can be exhausting. A lot of organizations want it for free. And the fact that they are able to pressure people into these conversations undervalues the work of what we do, but also what other people are doing in DEI. It's important to have experts. It's important to have experts in the room. And it's also important that you're protecting yourself. The first rule of all of this is try to be as safe as you can for you. And I say this to women asking about allyship too. You know, when you're at intersections, consider how things are going to be received, how things are going to be anticipated, and try to work around them as much as you can while still pushing.
You two seem to work so well together. You can finish each other's sentences. I'm wondering, what have you learned about each other in this process of, you know, you met over margaritas and tacos, probably on a Taco Tuesday. So what have you learned? What have you learned about each other?
You know what's funny? Bethany and I actually met at work, and both of us, we were working in police reform. And if you can imagine how difficult that kind of work is, that heavy lifting is. And we are both the kinds of individuals that say, we do not go to work and make friends. I have my own friends. My work life and my professional life are very separate. Yeah. And those individuals that actually know me know that I keep that line very, very, very strict. And Bethany was the same. We would say our good morning in the morning, and both of us would shut our office doors. And what we learned was, Bethany working in policy and me working in engagement and resources, is that we have the same foundation, which is mutual respect and always advocating for individuals that don't look like you and don't experience things the way that you do. And after a while, when you find that kind of kinship with somebody, you know that that kind of bond is very special. And we actually fought friendship for a very long time.
We did.
I was like, no, doesn't that not work?
And I was like, I don't leave my house ever.
I was like, she's very introverted. I'm very extroverted. And after a while, when she came to me with the idea of even creating an organization, I was really reticent. Mm-hmm. But the thing about it is, when you foundationally trust the way that an individual is and who that person is, it's extremely easy. And more than that, we lead in a way that is it's a co-hierarchy, right? We are leading together. We lead in a way that capitalizes on both of our skills. So I know that in the places that I lack, Bethany shines. And in the places that she lacks, I shine. And it's something that, again, I hope and I wish for every single woman is to be able to have somebody that's in your corner fighting those battles so that you don't even have to think about that. You don't even have to know what somebody says behind your back because you have somebody that's already listening out for you.
I'm going to cry about that later. Just put that in the pocket. The co-leading part is what I wrote down because I remember when we started it, at the time ChiChi was going, you have more degrees, you should get paid more, you should be in charge of it, this is your baby. And I was like, I really don't think so. I think your skills are probably more important for what we want to do. And also at the time, going back to imposter syndrome, I saw so much in ChiChi that I wanted to work with and that I wanted to lift up as much as I could. ChiChi is, there's no words for it. She's exceptional. She's exceptional at everything she does. She's extremely polished. She's thoughtful. She is flexible. And she's one of my best friends after we've been through so much together. But I would say, when we started out, it was kind of, we're like, how's this going to go? Are we going to ruin our friendship in the next 3 months? The reality is we've never had a fight. We don't really fight. We come to an agreement. And the reality is that we're additive for one another. And we consistently get asked in meetings, how are you friends? How are you doing this work? How do you co-lead? A lot of times people will decide one of us is in charge. They'll just start emailing one of us and be like, I know you're co-leaders, but it's really ChiChi, isn't it? And the reality is we loop each other back in and we say, no, we're leading this together. And it has only been additive. Enlightened Solutions would not be what it is without ChiChi. We wouldn't even be having this conversation without ChiChi.
Wow. Can we clap for that? You get so, in the weeds of the work, and sometimes you forget to look up at the person next to you that's right in it with you. So it's beautiful just to see the two of you supporting each other and to be so open and honest about it.
You should see our marketing photos. They look like engagement photos. A lot of love.
So just a couple questions as we get ready to wrap up, because we could be here all night. We just need the tacos and the margaritas to come in. Ladies, what does healing look like for you? How do you define it? What words come to mind?
I think healing for me is stillness. I'm such a busybody. My parents know this. I'm always talking. I'm always thinking about something. I'm always reading something. And I think when I decided to really sit down and heal is sitting down and being still and being really present in what's going on. Being present with what's going on in my body, like knowing like, okay, you're getting anxious. You're in the throes of a panic attack. You need to be still. Or more than that, are you using work or professional engagements to hide something else, right? So that healing has to be being still and listening to yourself, and more than that, understanding that you can't do it all. Like, I've really given up the idea of, like, I'm going to change everything all at once. Like, no. The easiest thing to do is just to take a step forward and just to start. And sometimes the easiest step to do, the easiest step to take is just breathing and being still.
I would say my idea of healing is knowing that no one else has to go through this. And that's why when we started Enlightened Solutions, we were at a point where ChiChi and I in our careers, we were really frustrated. We were having tacos and margaritas, quite a few of them. We were frustrated with the opportunities afforded to us, the lack of opportunities, the feedback we were getting. And I remember telling ChiChi, like, I don't know how I can move past this without like doing something substantive. And I said, do you want to start a nonprofit? And we went from there. For me, it's, I do a lot of stillness. I'm introverted, so I do a lot of my own time introverting. But for me, it's about battle. It's about fighting. It's about holding people accountable. When we come to these things and we hear these stories, my primary emotion is anger. I feel incredible rage.
That means time to.
Okay, I'm gonna get up and just run. But that's how it feels. For me, healing would be leaving this earth knowing that the people behind me are doing much better than I was. Not just a little bit better, but that they're thriving. I can be peaceful leaving this earth knowing that, and I'm not there yet. So I'm still here and I'm still fighting.
It's beautiful. Final words, ladies. And as you share your final words, can you share how, for folks who want to get involved, how they can support your work?
I think the first final word that I, on behalf of Enlightened Solutions, would like to say is, first and foremost, thank you to every single Black woman that is in this room. The fact that you're even here on Tuesday at 8 p.m. in the middle of winter in Cleveland, it's just, if I wasn't speaking, I'd be at home. But more than that, thank you to the Black women in Northeast Ohio every single day that are fighting to live, fighting to thrive, and are pushing these systems in any way that they possibly can, even if it just means waking up and putting 2 feet on your floor every single morning. I think that's the resounding thing that we have to say. We literally could not have done this work and this project without you, and we constantly, continuously will need your work and your advocacy in the public sphere as we move forward.
I would like to echo that. Every Black woman who participated, who gave us feedback, who advocated, Black women have not only been the participants, but the champions of this work. And Black women are the ones with the most to lose, the ones who are so easily marginalized, so easily kicked out of conversations. And it's, like I said, the conversations I'm having with women in general is that we need to follow that lead. Black women are the leaders in this conversation, and so we need to be there as backup. But I am consistently in awe of the talent and beauty and brilliance of the Black women in Cleveland. There is so much to be built here, and I think, going back to my anger and frustration, it's that you look out and you see all these beautiful and amazing people, and they are not having the potential. They're not reaching the potential that they have. And then we talk with executives and they say, where is the talent? You can't see it. You can't foster it. You can't talk to them, right? So I just want to say thank you. And also that we are up here talking, but we see you as leaders.
Yeah.
I just want to, as we close, and I'm going to turn it over to Twyla and Dr. Sadie Winlock, I want to thank Enlightened Solutions, ChiChi, Bethany. Can we all give them a round of applause? I mean, this work is not easy. Again, these two beautiful women are standing at the front and are the voice for our community. And we see you, we appreciate you, and we don't have enough advocates. So again, I just think about Minda's words about courage, and it takes so much courage just to show up. So, and I want to close by saying thank you all. Thank you to the library again for opening up the room today. I mean, when we first started talking about this event, I mean, I kept saying, well, what about the Black women in the room? What about the Black woman who doesn't even know that she's experiencing these issues right now? How are we going to save her? And so the thought, I am that Black woman, in Project Noir, in Right Within, in the MEMO. And so my hope is that, we started out talking about the intention. And the intention today was that there would be an opening, that you would have an opening, no matter how you walk through that door today, tired, ready to change, or just wanting to know more. We hope that you had an opening today. We hope that you know that you are absolutely beautiful, flaws and all. I wouldn't want to be anything else but a Black woman. Look at the Black woman next to you, say, yes, girl. So thank you all again so much for being here. Thank you to the library. Please follow Soul to Soul podcast. We're all about having soul-filled conversations, and give yourselves another round of applause.
So like Twyla began this conversation, you know how you have all these prepared notes that you want to say, but as these wonderful ladies were speaking, I thought of a couple of things. Number one, I was at a program a couple of years ago, and the speaker made a comment that reminds me of these two wonderful women, all three. that collaboration moves at the same speed as trust. They trust each other. And that's what we need to do as a community of women. We've got to start trusting each other. That's number one. I'm supposed to talk about what's next, but I don't say that. I'd like to see a show of hands of how many of you would be interested in the library creating more conversations working with Enlightened Solutions. That was a weak clap. So my role at the library, I'm Chief Equity, Education, and Engagement Officer, and Twyla is Director of Inclusion. This topic is what we do 24/7, and it's very important to us. I promise you, this won't be the last conversation we have about this. Our next steps is to create something to continue the conversation with these women. So thank you.
Segue, Dr. Winlock, and I'm not reading that script because I can't remember and I can't see it. But a part of what we want to make sure that you do, so Dr. Winlock just said it and you heard it, so you hold her to it, that we will continue to have conversations like these with Enlightened Solutions and, of course, with Miss Simone Swanson. But for now, keep the conversation going with Minda Harts, with Enlightened Solutions, and the Cleveland Public Library. You can follow us on our social media platforms, post some questions, post some comments about tonight so that people who weren't here have the opportunity to see what you experienced, and maybe it inspires them to stop in and join us for the next conversation. But just keep the conversation going. Next slide, Brian. All right. So I was thinking about this while I was listening to everything that ChiChi, Bethany, and Minda and Simone was saying, and I thought about my day today. And I thought about all of the hats that I wore today, starting at 4 a.m. because I wanted to make sure that everything that you experienced today was awesome. Even though things didn't happen the way that it was supposed to, I got up to make sure that I was prepared for you. Not only did I do that, I was a wife, a mother, making sure the boys got off to school. I got here, I had to help play AV tech, caterer setup, moving tables. I mean, we did everything today. But the most important role that I play right here in this moment is humble servant to the city of Cleveland. And so that role is me making sure that conversations like this continue to happen. I need you to help me do that. So you have a survey. I got a copy of it. It's on the bottom of your program. Please share that feedback with us. If there are conversations that you want us to have, put that in the survey. If there are things that happen tonight, now don't say anything about technology, but if there are things that happen tonight that you want to make sure that we either keep doing or change, put that in the survey. We will share that up. Dr. Winlock is at the executive level. You have our board trustee right here. So we can share that information with them to let them know the community wants this, right? So we need you. We need you to do that. I made it as large as it possibly could be, too. So if you didn't have this little program, you have the opportunity also to take that same survey by just taking a snapshot of it with your phone. So that is my humble ask to you. Lastly, there are desserts out in the hallway or the lobby. You can meet and greet and talk with ChiChi and Bethany, and then we're going to leave and safe travels at 8 o'clock tonight. So you've got 2 minutes. But thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.